Welcome back to Expert Instruction, the Teach by Design podcast where we dive deeper into the research surrounding student behavior by talking with the people implementing these practices, where they work, and with the students they support. I'm Megan Cave.
And I'm Nadia Sampson.
Team, we have a bonus episode of the podcast. That's we get 2 episodes this March. Unbelievable. It's our first ever bonus content. BOCO. Typically, our guests are researchers, teachers, coaches, school people, but not today. No. Today you get us, all of us people here at PBISApps. With us today, joining us in this conversation is Katie Schulz, Diertra Lomeli, and Seth May. And if it's okay with all of you guys, I wrote up some intros. Are you okay for me to introduce you to everybody? Okay.
Nice, Megan.
Okay, cool. So if you've ever sent an email with a question about your account, a bug in the application, how to integrate data, or when to take a survey, it's very possible that you've heard from Katie. She's a longtime member of our management and support team, and she has this uncanny ability to solve just about any puzzle you throw her way. And believe me, I personally have tried. And if Katie can't solve that puzzle, then you've probably heard from Diertra. He is the management and support team manager and our resident PBISApps Wikipedia. She knows how to use every bit of our apps and is full of ideas on how we can make them work better to the benefit of literally every school we support. And Seth wrote SWIS. So he did it as a student at the University of Oregon. I still don't quite understand how Rob Horner finagled that situation, but he did. And we're so grateful for it because Seth is a developer, but he is also now the director of IT here in our department. And the thing I always appreciate about him is the way that we can tell him an idea and he immediately starts to think about how that would work from a technology standpoint. And he asks such good clarifying questions, and all of our work is better for it. The 4 of us, along with Jessica Daly, our director, Kent McIntosh, and most recently, Alan Cook, are on the tail end of a project that we've been working on for is it 12 weeks, you guys? Has it been 12 weeks? Because it was the first
October. So yeah. Whatever backwards from October. Now to October is.
Yes, I think we've been working on it for about 12 weeks, and somehow the stars all aligned, and that work that we've been up to happens to sync right up with the topic that we've been talking about since February, VDPs. And so maybe you've seen the articles, the announcement emails about the work that our project team has been up to, but if you haven't, we've been busy updating the definitions to the referral category labels in SWIS. So in SWIS, we've got these categories that go along with every referral, and in those drop-down menus are labels, and every label in SWIS has to be defined. And those definitions need to be mutually exclusive, which means we can't have any overlap. They need to be operationally defined, which means that we kind of have to describe a little bit about what that behavior actually looks like. And the list itself needs to be exhaustive so that we've given you the labels so that you're using that other label real infrequently. And we like to, as a group, as a PBISApps group, we like to revisit those definitions from time to time. And we realized that it had actually been a long time since we had done that. So that's what we did. A very long time. Yeah. So that's what we did. We basically became a project team of definers.
So as Megan said, we have been talking recently this month about vulnerable decision points, or VDPs. So why is it important to include defining behavior as part of this discussion? I don't think it's readily apparent necessarily to all of us. So how are these things related?
Yeah. Diertra and Katie, do you want to start?
I think one of the things that's just really important, especially as we were going through the list, is that a lot of behaviors you can look at in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a clear definition that everyone in your school agrees on, it becomes really easy for people who are in those vulnerable decision points to just be frustrated and just start like nitpicking at behaviors because of how they're feeling in the moment. But if everyone is aware of the definition of these behaviors and how as a school we agree we should handle these behaviors, it provides a really good kind of thing for that person to hold on to in that moment.
Right. We've talked about subjective behaviors a lot in our work, especially related to equity and the way that students of color, particularly Black students, are referred differently than their white peers for referral for behaviors that are not so clearly defined. Things like defiance, disruption. We were recently talking with Sean last couple of episodes. We've been talking to him and his work, and he found that physical aggression was another behavior that where students were referred differently. White students the behavior was managed in the classroom by staff members, and for Black students, physical aggression was a behavior that was sent out of the classroom to the office. And so by defining what these behaviors actually look like, you're actually contributing to improving equity in your overall referral process. Seth, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say that, we all bring our own perspective, our own backgrounds, our own lenses to the table whenever we are making decisions. And that means that two of us might see the same issue, the same problem behavior from two very different lenses. And a lot of problems can occur when we look at things the same thing and see two different things. And so by spending the time to understand that when I say this word, this is what I mean, it really helps to eliminate a lot of those problems. So when we clarify our definitions, we help to ensure that everybody's using the same terms, and that improves both the quality of the data that we're collecting and also the quality of the decisions that we're able to make out of that data.
Well said.
Very well said. Super helpful. All of your responses were very helpful. Diertra, did you have something?
Yeah, I would just add to that around when you, as part of a school team, when you're working through defining what that behavior looks like, it helps with explaining and teaching the expectations to students. So then transforming the behaviors that and exactly what that looks like, and then that meeting the school-wide expectations and in our school and in our context, what that looks like. So it can also just relate back to then how we're teaching students our agreed upon behaviors in the school.
Yeah.
So what does it look like and what does it not look like? And hopefully students and teachers can be more on the same page about those things. So yeah, great. Thank you. So you all were working in this group, working on this team, this subcommittee for a long time, 12 weeks, Megan said, or so.
I think it was. I don't know.
I bet. So what did that process of defining behaviors in SWIS, what did it look like? Talk me through your process. What did you do? How'd you do it? All those things.
Well, I can start. You guys jump in. So we brought together a team of people. That was kind of the first part of the process. And to the team that we brought together, we tried to include a representative from every group in our organization, because like Seth said, we all come with different perspectives and backgrounds and experiences. And so we wanted, because we're all committed to this particular set of definitions as, an organization, we wanted to get feedback from everybody and include that. So we got together a group that had representation. And then we set a regular meeting. It was every Wednesday for a long time. And thankfully we had an existing document to go on. But we just kind of went through it one at a time. And we, the other part of that is that because it had been some time since we had revisited these definitions, we had heard from schools between the last time and now about some of remember I said that the list needs to be exhaustive. And so we heard from them some of the labels that they felt were missing from the list. And so we just worked together to revisit the list, essentially the list of behaviors, locations, motivations, what actions taken. Is that it?
Yeah, I
I
was
think
going
that
to
was-
ask, were
I think
you,
that
were you
was pretty
taking
much it.
about, what you were hearing in the last several years from
Yeah.
our schools, from our educators,
Mhm.
and that was helping to guide your conversation. It sounds like it was.
Yeah, for me, I mean, coming back to quality data, I think it's really important that we have clear definitions, well vetted categories, and that really helps lead to better decisions. And SWIS is a very opinionated piece of software. We don't let everybody just enter whatever categories they want, because we've actually seen this lead to really, really bad data, really bad decision making. With all that said, I think it's really important that everybody understands that we take a great deal of care and thought about the labels that we use and what are presented there within SWIS. And so we definitely looked at how language has changed around behavior. We looked at how we could simplify or streamline the language to improve the overall consistency of the application. And then also how school environments have changed over time. And then trying to take all of that information, as well as the data and the requests that have come in. We looked at each of the labels and each of the definitions and looked at how they could be improved or how they could be adjusted. And that's really, the goal of what we've tried to do. And I think hopefully it shows.
Yeah.
And having been here a long time and hearing what you're saying, Seth, I really want to reiterate that we are really careful about this from the very
12
beginning.
weeks, people. 12 weeks.
Well, and for weeks, but for years, we've tried to be really careful with what we put in SWIS. Yes, it's very opinionated, but we've really tried to put in there what we know to be true, or what we're finding, what's evidence-based, what we're hearing from schools. So I really appreciate you mentioning that, because I believe that has been true for years, since SWIS was developed. So you've talked a little bit about what you learned as you made your way through the definitions and the labels, that there's some overlap, things were outdated, maybe some definitions were too specific or maybe a little too broad. So are there other things that you want to mention that you learned? And then what did you do with what you learned?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, yeah, one of the things that I know Katie and I find often when we talk to schools and educators in schools is there's a request for, like, this behavior isn't there, and it sometimes just is around the label or the what we're calling behavior, and so really we always refer them back to kind of check the definitions, look at, while SWIS, we are calling it time out of class, the actual definition is encompassing that, timeout. Maybe you in your building, you're calling it timeout. But that the definition is the same. And so just kind of looking that, so with knowing that sometimes how we refer to things or the label may be some variability, that the definition often is very common, and then adding kind of an example. So for particular in our school, that example is, and that was one of actually my favorite parts.
Me too.
I know we came up with lots of examples that may or may not cover some of things that our students or our children maybe may or may not have received a referral for.
Right.
And that part was really helpful, I think, we defined it, but then also giving a little context of, for example, this may look like this. And that was really helpful. And I think will be a really helpful piece for schools, that they can look at the definition and then see examples and be like, yes, that actually fits into that category.
Yeah, or that they could take our definitions that we've just gone through the process of making, and then just clear out the examples we've given and add their own from their own context, so that it becomes a document that's really specific to a school.
I love that you mentioned that those examples are there, and that people can also tweak those examples so that they contextually fit with their school, because I know that's something that folks ask. So staying true to the definition, But at the
Mhm.
same time, it might look a little bit different contextually in different schools. I think really adds that flexibility. So I'm excited to see those examples. So that's
Yeah.
great.
Definitely.
That
Go
document,
ahead.
sorry, Megan.
Go ahead.
With that document in particular, we really wanted it to make a document that was useful for schools.
Yes.
To have readily available, that was clear to understand, and that could be, used and, kind of made specific for their own purposes. So that was an exciting outcome of this project that I don't think was necessarily the forefront. I mean, obviously the changes in
Right.
SWIS were kind of the most important,
Mhm.
but updating this document, I think, is actually going to be a really helpful tool that just kind of ended up being a really good, kind of byproduct of the updates in SWIS.
Nice. Great.
Yeah.
And I
So
think
nuts and bolts, I
Go
think,
ahead,
of the
go ahead.
changes. So nuts and bolts of the changes that we made, where we did find, you mentioned an overlap. We found one place where our labels overlapped, and it was, we were just talking about it this morning. It was, what was it? Lying and theft were the two behaviors, and included in that label, in both labels, were behaviors related to academic issues. Yeah, dishonesty. And so what we decided to do was just remove so they overlapped each other in that way.
Right.
And so what we decided to do was leave, theft and lying as their own actual labels, but we just removed those academic components from the label and created a new one called academic dishonesty.
Oh, nice.
So for schools that when students, I think the two behaviors related to academic dishonesty that were in the labels were cheating and plagiarism.
Mm-hmm.
And so those types of behaviors now have their own label, so that if a student stole something, it's not, if a student plagiarized their work, it doesn't show up as they stole something.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
Yes, and that it's never made
that.
sense to me the way that was set up anyway. So that's great. That makes so much more sense.
And then another thing that we ended up doing was, let's see, it was related to, okay, so I was talking about the way we talk about behavior. So I hopefully, maybe people have noticed, maybe you haven't, but none of us have been talking about problem behaviors on this episode. And so that was one change that we wanted to be really deliberate about in the way that we talk about it, which is that behavior doesn't need to have a qualifier in front of it. It is just behavior. Whenever you add that qualifier of appropriate or problem, or maybe there's another one, I don't know, expected, is that it's appropriate to whom, or it's a problem for who. And so you just take out the problem part and we just talk about behavior. We also have two types of behaviors within SWIS. We've in the past we referred to them as majors and minors, and now we wanted to really focus on where the decisions or where the consequences or actions are handled related to that behavior. So we're now calling minor behaviors staff managed, and we're calling major behaviors administrator managed. So it really focuses the attention on who is the person that's supporting and handling this particular incident.
It really takes the judgment in some respects off the behavior, because I think sometimes we get confused.
Severity.
The severity, and we start thinking that those that there's a lot of judgment in there, and that this is somehow the consequence. Getting a piece of documentation is somehow related to the consequence. And for some reason, I'm connecting those two things, and it sounds like you really took that away, and it seems much more clear.
In the same vein, when we went to the data and we looked at the data and what was being used, we definitely saw within custom fields that people were using a lot of custom fields to track restorative practice in action taken. And so, bringing that to the table and taking what we've seen and adding it on is a really important one for us.
So we've actually been talking about this variability in how educators address student behavior. Do you think the changes that have been made will allow for that variability for for educators and how they address things. And
Ned, you were talking about, when we were talking about these questions,
Yes.
you were talking about tardy. Do you want to share?
Right. So tardy was one of those ones where I know we had a minor tardy, major tardy, and now we're staff managed, administrator managed. But we would hear from folks, well, what does tardy mean to you in your classroom? Well, for some educators, tardy is if you're not in your seat with ready to go with your materials, you're tardy. If being in the classroom wasn't enough. Whereas for other educators in a building, it was as long as you're in the classroom, that's fine. That works for them. So do you feel like there's still some allowances or for that variability for folks to have things still look a little bit different in their classrooms of what their expectations are around those definitions or behaviors?
I think we really do. I think our real goal here is we want to build environments that are highly predictable for both the students, the educators, and the administrators. And if there's too much variability, it can cause confusion. But every school has their own culture. They have, their own norms, their own expectations. And the key is to provide that internal consistency that ensures that everybody's working from the same playbook. And so it doesn't really matter if tardy means the same thing in your school as it does, a district away. I mean, hopefully they're close, but what it looks like in your environment, as long as everybody understands what that looks like, I think that's the real key.
And I'd say too that, classrooms have their own expectations, and they should always be tied into what the school-wide expectations are.
Yes.
And so classrooms sort of become this little microcosm, this little tiny community that's representative of the larger. And so you can have expectations that are specific to your room as long as you teach what those are.
Excellent point.
So if tardy is, you should absolutely teach, first of all, you should teach students, what does it mean to be tardy? When will I mark that as something that has happened? And then once you've taught that, then I think that's okay, to have some variance in your classroom. I would say though, the thing to decide on as a school is whether specific behaviors are staff managed behaviors or are they administrator managed behaviors? Can they be both? And when does it become an administrator issue and sending students out of the classroom? Or versus, keeping them in the classroom engaged in instruction and just handling it as something that you manage personally. I think that is something that you need to have consistency on within your school.
We want less variability around that.
Yes, so tardy needs to be something that you decide as a school.
Yes.
Is or is not going to be something that's handled by an administrator.
Yes, that level of predictability, I think, is really important. And I think you've both said that in different ways. So great.
Yeah.
How do you anticipate the changes that y'all have made affecting decision making in school? Because that's really what this is all about. We want our schools, we want our educators to be able to use the data for decision making that lends itself to better outcomes for students and staff. So how do you see this affecting decision making in schools?
So I think about the new categories and everything we've done, and one of the core questions that I know we discussed it quite a bit is whenever we looked at should this be included, should this be split apart, is does having this lead to a different decision being made? And that was really important because you can take the data and you can break it down too far. SWIS is really meant to be a decision-making system, not a data tracking system. We want to take data and we find the right level so that real human beings can take it and look at it and make really impactful decisions. And so we don't want to track every detail and every nuance, and we want to find that right level. And so the categories that we've selected, whenever we came to the decision points, we said, is this going to be different if we track this separately, and a lot of times we said no, let's keep these in the same group so that it makes the decision making easier, because they're not going to be any different.
I think about that discussion that we had, because we added some SWIS comes with subtypes for specific
Yes.
behaviors.
Yes.
And I think about the conversation that we had related to technology violation. Seth brought to our group a list of all the ways that schools have created custom fields for technology violation. And so we basically had two ways we could go. We could give folks a default of the types of technology, like phone, tablet, personal device, computer, laptop, whatever. We could do that. But Diertra, I remember, was really good about bringing us back to the decision-making component. And she said, but if I know that a student had a technology violation on their phone, does that lead me to a different decision than if I just knew that there was a technology violation? And so then we start talking about it and we think, well, really, it's if they're doing something inappropriate with a school technology, a laptop, a tablet, whatever, versus they're bringing their phone out and texting their friends in class. And so that's when we decided to pivot and give the defaults as school issued or personal. So that played into it. So it just kind of comes back to that whole process of how does this change affect a decision that a school might make?
That's so helpful. It's one of those conversations that I feel like we've had through the life of SWIS, is when people make requests about different features in the applications. We're always, how will that lend itself to better decision making? Is this piece of information going to give us more than what we already have, or lead us, again, as Seth said, to making a different decision? So I think that's so important. And it just reminds me of that phrase we've heard for years and years, is you don't want to drown in your data. You want to have enough and not too much and not too little. So that's great. This is important work. This is exciting work. Where can folks learn more about this?
Go to our website. We've got, Megan has already got some really helpful articles up. I think by the time this comes out, she'll have all, if not almost all of the articles up that have some really helpful tips, especially when it comes to implementing or not these new features as we approach the end of the school year.
The new definitions are already posted. They're available. Alan, who's not here today talking about this with us, but he and the rest of the training team members have been working on updating the referral form examples, because those also have not been updated in quite some time.
Right,
Could use some work, so he'll have that. And then over the next few weeks, we'll come out with some tutorial videos and I don't know, just all kinds of updated resources. Social media, we'll post about some things on social media, so be sure that you're following us on Twitter and Facebook.
So all the things
Instagram.
in all the places.
Yeah.
Everything everywhere all at once.
And then they can always reach out to us with additional questions or in-depth and trying to look for more resources. We have a whole group of people that's ready and willing to help you.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thanks to all of you.
Thanks, guys.
For all your work.
Thanks.
You're very welcome.